What's up there, guys? Thanks for tuning in. This is Rick. You're watching Fanfare for the Conscious, and in the video today I'm going to be talking about cybernetics, polymaths and non-verbal reasoning. Let's dive in. So the reason I've decided to cover these subjects today is I wanted to give you guys a better idea of the thinking processes that go on and how I cognize and reason and use logic in order to come to my conclusions about what's going on in the world. And that comes down to three basic principles, and that is cybernetics, which is the study of communication and control processes in natural and artificial systems. It comes from polymath, and a polymath is a person with an extraordinarily broad and extensive knowledge and the ability to draw on those complex bodies of knowledge to solve problems. And it also comes down to non-verbal reasoning and mental modelling, which is the ability to use imagery, diagrams or codes combined with critical thinking and logic in order to solve problems. So cybernetics, the first one, this study of communication and control processes in systems, is something that I encountered when I went to university. I went to the University of Reading for 1 year, did my freshers year, where I studied cybernetics and artificial intelligence. Now, out of the 6 modules which I covered that year, I passed 5 of them quite comfortably, but unfortunately I did fail the maths, both the original exam and the resit. Actually did worse in the resit than I did in the original exam. However, not too concerned about that because I feel like I actually acquired an awful lot about what is going on in the world, and I acquired, I think, all the information that I was really supposed to take out of that cybernetics course, and that has allowed me and given me the skills to understand the world in a better way. So cybernetics, again, we cover things like positive and negative feedback, which is the way in which a system will communicate with itself in order to either amplify changes in that system or to diminish changes in that system. So you're talking about either destabilizing or stabilizing systems of feedback and self-communication. We also covered things like a Gaia hypothesis, where you can look at a collection of individuals as being like a single mind or a single organism in itself, which was a very interesting way of looking at the world, imagining the planet as this self-regulating system which is always talking to itself, and the universe in fact as this self-regulating system which is always talking to itself. And briefly covering positive and negative feedback. Positive feedback is the snowball effect. So imagine a hill with a snowball on the top. If you start to push that snowball away from the peak of the hill, then it starts to roll down the hill. And the further it rolls down the hill, the steeper the angle on which it is rolling and the faster it rolls. And that snowball continues further and further away from that rest position. The changes in the system are effectively amplified as that snowball moves away. The other one is negative feedback, and that is like a valley or a cup. If you can imagine a ball sat at the bottom of that valley, if you try and push it up the hill, the moment you release that and stop that force, it rolls back down the hill and then stabilizes itself again at the bottom. And that is a stabilizing system rather than a diversifying system. So a good way to think about a positive feedback system is to imagine the debt-based economy. So there's no money in the economy. That's the sort of default position. There's no money here, and a bank loans a certain amount of money to that economy, and then expects more back out of that economy than they originally put in. So that is going to require the creation of even greater debt, which then can't be paid back, so even more debt has to be created, and even more debt has to be created. And the amount of debt in the world continually rises and continually moves away from that normal, that central equilibrium state. This is the acceleration of divergence and the changes being amplified with every single step. The snowball running down the hill, so to speak. The other one, like I say, is the negative feedback system, and this is best thought of in terms of the neurotransmitters in your brain. This is the example I'm going to use today. So let's imagine you're depressed, and this bottom of the hill there represents the equilibrium which your body is trying to stay in. So you take some neurotransmitting chemicals, some antidepressants, and your levels of neurotransmitters go up. What the body then does in order to bring it back to normal is it stops producing an equivalent amount of those neurotransmitters, and your neurotransmitting levels again drop down to the bottom of the valley. So the doctor then gives you more antidepressants and you go up the side of the hill, but your body, in this effort to maintain equilibrium, then starts producing less of those chemicals, and your overall neurotransmitters, your dopamine and your serotonin, all drop back down to the bottom of this hill. And that is why once somebody gets into the cycle of taking antidepressants, the amount of antidepressants that they have to take and the strength of those pills will necessarily continually go up, because that body is always again trying to bring you back to the equilibrium state. Polymath is the next one I'm going to cover. That's the person with a broad and extensive knowledge and the ability to draw on that knowledge to solve problems. Now, I think being a polymath is quite important because it's very difficult to understand a landscape when you are zoomed in with your binoculars at maximum possible magnification and you're only looking at a very, very small piece of the puzzle in great detail. That's like, imagine, being zoomed in on a single tree in the landscape, and from that position where you're looking at this tree in great detail, you might imagine that the whole of that landscape is filled with trees, and that landscape is actually a forest because all you can see is trees. However, if you actually take the time to step back and zoom out from that position and consider a broader spectrum of knowledge, you realise that that is just one tree in the middle of a city, and you're actually looking at a built-up urban environment instead of the forest that you thought you were. The next thing I'm going to come down to is the non-verbal reasoning, and this is that ability to use images, diagrams or code combined with critical thinking and logic in order to solve problems. And I first encountered the idea of non-verbal reasoning when I was about 11 years old, and I was taking my 11+ test in order to go to Stretford Grammar School. Now, I did always have fairly good verbal reasoning skills. The thing which really sort of sat comfortably with me and that I was best at was this non-verbal reasoning, which is this ability to model things in your mind. So there's spatial reasoning involved, it's the ability to mentally flip images and the ability to mentally build models within your mind. Now, some of the best thinkers in the world have used non-verbal reasoning as a method of producing their theories and their understanding of the world. The two I'm going to bring up today are Nikola Tesla and Albert Einstein. Now, Nikola Tesla was known for being an incredible inventor and scientist and engineer. And what he used to do is he used to build his prototypes in his mind, and he did all his research and development and testing in his brain. So he would physically or mentally build his inventions and run them in his mind. And through that ability to mentally model it, was able to understand where improvements could be made, where there were potential flaws in the model. And that has been one of the main reasons he's been such a prolific inventor and a profound scientist. The other one, again, to say is the Albert Einstein. And Albert Einstein, when he was producing his theory of relativity, imagined himself being on a photon of light and riding that photon through the universe at light speed. He imagined what it would be like to look at the world from the perspective of that light beam moving at the speed of light. And that was how he came to a lot of his theories about relativity and how he became such the amazing scientist that he was. Now, all these things kind of play together in order to give you a much greater understanding of what's going on in the world. So there are, I personally think, more pros than cons, but there are cons. So I'm going to very sort of quickly go through the pros of this method of understanding the world. And the sort of main things I want to bring out is when you've got a broad spectrum of knowledge, you're able to engage in what I call principal transference. So all subjects are intimately connected. Academics like to convince us that they're all boxed, that there are certain things that only exist within the purview of a given subject, but there are always overlaps between them. The biggest example I like to give is science itself. So all biology is chemistry, and all chemistry is physics, and all physics is essentially maths. Therefore, maths is present in all of those subjects. Physics is present in the chemistry and in the biology, and chemistry is present in the biology. The biology forms psychology, and psychology forms sociology. So there's this interconnected layers, like the layers of an onion, or one of the Russian nesting dolls is a good way to think about it. Another way is to imagine history and law. They actually play together on an intricate and intimate level, because our law has been built up over hundreds of years of history and has been rewritten and back-referenced and continually tangled up with history in itself. So if you really want to understand law, you've got to also sort of understand the history which that law was built off as well. So that's the principal transference. I mean, the last thing I want to sort of cover with principal transference as well is the ability to take methodologies from disparate fields and apply them in other subjects. So the historical method of investigation, where you look at primary or secondary sources and you consider the bias of that. So was that person actually there at the event which they are describing, or are they reporting it based on somebody else's information? That's the difference between a primary and a secondary source. Primary sources being more valued than secondary sources. And the last thing you consider when you're looking at history is bias. So what was the personal circumstances of the person delivering this information in either the primary or the secondary source, and how could that have coloured the narrative which they spin around that situation. So if they're pro-royal, they're more likely to give a positive examples of the monarchy and give the events a positive spin towards the monarchy itself. Whereas if they're anti-establishment, they're more likely to negate any positivity that has been, engaged in by the monarchs in itself. And that's again very, very important, that sort of ability to transfer principles. The other one I like to use is the scientific methodology, whereby you have a hypothesis and a null hypothesis, a theory and an anti-theory. This is what I think has happened, and this is the opposite of what I think is happening. And you define what would allow you to either prove the hypothesis itself or prove the null hypothesis. And if your experiment doesn't allow for either one of those conditions to be filled, then it is a flawed experimental methodology. And you can apply that again to multiple different subjects, not just the cold hard science in itself. The cybernetics gives you an understanding of feedback, which is very important because, like I say, there are feedback systems present in all different systems, whether they are man-made in terms of economic systems and political systems, or whether they are natural in terms of biology or physics or the natural world. And understanding those simple systems of feedback allows you to get a better understanding of how a given set of circumstances will produce a set of results, and whether those results will be a runaway train in the process or whether there is a stabilizing process in itself. Being a polymath means that you can apply your knowledge in many different fields, and you start to recognize that there are these patterns that repeat on themselves. So in history, there has always been this idea of new information being rejected by the current establishment, to the point of people with new information being persecuted, being murdered, being tortured, being imprisoned, or just having their work utterly destroyed and suppressed. And this has happened time and time again. And once you're aware of that pattern that repeats itself over history, then you can start to recognize that same pattern as it's occurring in the real world, and it gives you a little bit more of an idea of exactly how events are playing out and the forces that may be involved and the result of a given system being put into place. And the last thing I'm going to come to here is this understanding of the interplay between disparate subjects. If you have this broad sense of knowledge where you know a little bit about a lot of things, that gives you a much wider understanding of the landscape as a whole. You're not zooming in and laser focused on this one specific subject and then trying to make interpretations on the whole world based on that very limited knowledge, where you've got an awful lot of knowledge about very little, as opposed to a little bit of a knowledge about an awful lot of things. Now we're going to come on to the cons, because like I say, there are always negative things to balance out the positive, and I do understand that there are also limitations to this particular perspective, and the main limitations are there is a lack of extreme detail in specific areas and the potential for misunderstanding of that subject detail. So I am not a lawyer. I don't understand law at the sort of deeper levels. I've not spent years studying it. I don't have a comprehension of the terminology involved, which means that although through my understanding of systems and my broad knowledge base, I might have a good idea of the essence of what is going on, I may not be correct on the given details, although in most cases I'm getting pretty close to the mark due to having this sort of broad knowledge on which I can draw whenever I'm talking about these subjects. And this is a lot about why I'm spending my time talking about things like Darwinism and the educational system and the financial system, because you do need to have these base understandings about lots of subjects in order to have a better idea of exactly what's going on in the world. The last one I want to come on to with regards to my cons is that being a polymath is not respected by the mainstream community. This is all tied into sort of education and indoctrination and the way we've been encouraged to hold specialists in a given subject above those who have the broader, wider sense of knowledge, because the whole educational system is built on increasing levels of knowledge, increasing amounts of knowledge about a more and more limited subject area. So you can imagine it like a pyramid. When you start learning in our educational system, you learn a little bit about lots of things. And the next stage, instead of learning a little bit about more things, you learn more detail about less subjects. And through your whole school life, you're encouraged to specialise, 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 until you're at the point of the pyramid here, where you know an awful lot about very, very little in the broader spectrum of things. And the people who have this specialist knowledge are encouraged to believe that they are superior to other people because they have this piece of paper that says that I am smart, that they can wave at you. And yes, they will probably have an awful lot more knowledge in a specific area, but this gives them a false sense of superiority and allows them to dismiss things about subjects that they don't understand, because they don't understand how those subjects interplay with each other and the relevance of those different subjects. You will see people say, oh, but that point, that's irrelevant, that's nothing to do with what you're talking about. Whereas the polymath who's standing back and looking at the whole landscape can understand that the physics is tied into the biology, and the history is tied into the law, and the financial system is tied into the educational system and into everything else. And having that broad idea of exactly what's going on means that they don't necessarily respect you, because there is no piece of paper for being a polymath. There is no qualification for having a broad knowledge base about many different subjects. So that just brings me to the end of the video, and just leaves me to say thank you very much for watching, if indeed you still are. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see more just like me, and if you particularly like this video, hit the thumbs up. Don't forget to set the bell notification icon to all to make sure you are always kept up to date with my latest content, which drops on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays at 8 p.m. British time. If you do want to communicate with me on a more personal level and you want to be part of the changes that are going on in the world right now, please come and join me at lawfulbank.com. It is a lawful knowledge bank and bank of real living individuals who are willing to do what is necessary in order to change the world for the better. Think of it as our own self-owned social media platform. We have friends lists, we have personal profiles, we have a news feed, we have forums and branches in which you can organise with your other local lawful living beings and make real things happen in your own communities. It's a fantastic platform with lots of functionality, and I encourage you to take a little bit of time to learn how to use it, either on your smartphone or ideally on your PC. more videos to come in the future regarding that. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. It's been a pleasure talking to you today. Take care of yourselves, guys. Don't forget to stay free, think free, act free, and I will see you next time.